Welcome to your Sunday Songwriting Tips with me, Alex Von Soos. And today we're going to talk about arrangement and how to present your song in the best possible light. Now, arrangement is one of those things that is relatively easy to do quickly, but it's also easy to mess up badly. So we're going to look at a few tips and tricks and on how we can make our song appear better. I'm not saying better than it really is. Of course, we are assuming that the song that you are arranging and producing is a brilliant song, but we want to give it the best possible chance in life. And we're going to look at lots of examples, and so it's going to be quite a practical session today. And maybe we should briefly talk about what arrangement is and the whole process. Let's say we write our song in the traditional way, starting with maybe a chord progression, maybe on a guitar or piano, or programming some chords, and we're starting with the drum beat. It doesn't matter. And then we maybe layer on a melody, and then we write some lyrics. Again, we can talk any old way. We can start with a title and then work backwards, have a melody that goes with a title and maybe a few lyrics that come to us whilst we are working on the concept. And then we can put some music to all of this later on. But at some point, we're going to have to solve the problem which is called arranging the song in the best possible way. And for this, it helps to do a lot of listening, because many songwriters make the mistake of working too much on their own music and not listening to enough of what other people are doing. So they lock themselves away in this sort of bubble from where they hope that a great song and a great track is going to emerge. And that can work, but more often than not, it doesn't. So again, this is going to be a bit of a theme today. We're just going to listen to a lot of what other people are doing, how the greats, the masters are doing it, and what we can learn from that, so that we can make sure that whenever people listen to our music, it's, like I said, presented in the best possible light. So that's the step of arranging our song, putting some instruments around it, and so whether it be chordal instrument or drums or bass. And then of course there's also things like backing vocals and how you arrange the lead vocal. Maybe your song has a rap in it, and so there's lots of options that we have. And then after the initial arrangement stage, we go to the production, which will then be the finer details of programming and mixing and mastering. Of course, the boundaries and transitions are quite fluent in that respect, because it's always a good idea to begin with the end in mind. And this is not a phrase that I've coined. It's from an author called Stephen Covey, and so he has written a business self-help book, if you like, which is called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so I think it's habit number 2, which goes on about begin with the end in mind. And so that's why it's good to learn about all the different aspects of songwriting and production, so that you know the later stages, even if you're not an expert in all of the stages. For example, if you are not a fully trained mastering engineer, maybe it's going to be difficult to polish your song to such an extent that it's indistinguishable from a proper record, so to speak. But if you know the challenges that a mastering engineer faces, then you can work backwards into your mix, into your arrangement, and later on into your songwriting as well. So that's why we're doing all of this, and that's why it's good to have an education, have a very broad education. So that applies to everything that the Garnish School teaches, from workstations like Logic, Pro Tools, Ableton, and so forth, to mixing and mastering, sound design, and of course what we're talking about in these Sunday songwriting tips, which is songwriting, and arrangement is a big part of it. So that was where arrangement, where what we're doing today fits into the greater scheme of things. It's important to keep that scheme of things in mind when we're looking at any of the smaller aspects of it. And what we should probably do is just listen to a few songs and get a feel for what I want to talk about today. And for today I've prepared a playlist, and that playlist, the songs on that playlist are quite similar, but they're not the same. So today is going to have an uplifting feel to it, so I hope you don't mind. It's going to be some disco or new disco, whatever you want to call them, tunes, party tunes, but they're all arranged differently. They're not all the same. So the reason why I've got this playlist going is because, not only of course in preparation for today's session, but also because I am doing a mix, a production in that genre right now, and I needed to compile some reference tracks. And so what we're doing today is also going to be important for your mixing skills and mastering skills, because to choose the right references for your track is super important, because I'm sure you've experienced this, after you've been mixing for a while, you lose all objectivity and then references become really important. But you can take this further and start with those references really early on in the arrangement process. And that's what I'm certainly doing with my current production. So before I spend ages mixing something, I really make sure that is in line with where I wanted to take the song, because you should always have an end goal in mind, like Stephen Covey said in his business book. So today, as I said, it's going to be new disco, whatever you want to call it, uplifting party music. And so we're going to have a listen, and then we're going to try and find out what is special about a particular arrangement, because if it's not special, if there's nothing we can call out, then it's probably not very good. Or the song is so good that it doesn't need anything. And this is the other big thing I want to try and accomplish today, is to try and separate the different stages in our hearing, meaning that we can hear what the song is doing, the traditional pure songwriting elements like chords, lyrics, melodies, and then also that we can hear what the arrangement brings to it. And if we strip the arrangement back, if we strip all the clever programming and mixing and mastering back, would the song still stand up? How do all these different elements work together? So that's quite a big ask. Obviously, we cannot do all of this in one session, but we're going to make some progress, and let's just make a start. I'm just going to play a few short snippets because we want to get through lots of songs. So we're going to start with Dua Lipa, who is probably the main proponent of this genre right now, but there will be others, of course, for those of you who are not into Dua Lipa, but I think that latest album is fantastic. So I'm going to start with a song called Levitating, and let's give it a spin.
Billboard, baby, do a leap and make them dance when they come on. Everybody looking for a dance floor to run on.
If you wanna run away with me, I know a galaxy and I can take you for a ride. I had a premonition that we fell into a rhythm where the music don't stop for life. Glitter in the sky, glitter in my eyes, shining just the way I like. If you're feeling like you need a little bit of company, you met me at the perfect time. You want me, I want you, baby.
So, what did you hear? I think in general terms, you could probably say that this arrangement is quite traditional, meaning it doesn't use any modern sounds, or at least it doesn't use any sounds that could only have been produced right now, maybe in the last 5 years or so. So for those of you who've been following our live streams, some of them are about very cutting edge programming and sound design techniques, and I think we can safely say that in this song there haven't been too many of those. So what we have here is a very traditional arrangement with drums, a traditional bass, and piano or Rhodes and guitar, and it's something that you would have found in the 70s when disco was king. Of course, it sounds better now. It sounds more polished, more hi-fi, but it's basically still the same. So when you consider the title of the album, which is called Future Nostalgia, then I think you get a hint of where Dua Lipa and her producers were going with this. And in the chorus, as you just heard, there's a pad coming in, but even in the 70s, polyphonic synthesizers were around, and so it's not something that could only have happened in the last few years or so. So to start us off, as I said, a very traditional arrangement, quite sparse as well, but it's not super sparse. It's not just the vocal and then just one more instrument or something like that. Right, let's listen to another song from the same album, and this song is called Cool.
Guess I never had a love like this.
This is a lot sparser, right?
Hit me harder than I ever expected. We've been up all goddamn night, all night, all night. Keep it going till we
Just
see the
synths and
sunlight.
vocals.
And the color of the sky looking nice and nice. You know, you know, you know.
Still no kick, no snare.
If you know, you know, you got me losing all my cool, 'cause I'm burning up for you. In control of what I do, and I love the way you move. We get the heat and the thrill, 'cause you're more than any pill.
Still very empty.
Never running out of juice, when it's only me and you. You got me losing all my cool.
Now it's filling up, right?
Guess we're ready for the summer.
Okay, so in this arrangement we had a lot of restraint, which is a great ability to have as a writer-producer. For example, if you're writing melodies, you want to make sure that you don't write too many notes, like the famous quote goes from the Mozart film. And if you are arranging parts, you don't want to put in too many tracks in your session, because what it does, it just clutters up everything, and from a technical point of view, it also makes the song harder to mix, and we obviously don't want that. We all know how difficult mixing is, so if we make it even more difficult for ourselves by or through having 100 tracks that we barely know what to do with, then that's obviously not a very good idea. So lots of advantages in keeping things simple, but we don't want them to be simplistic. So there's a fine line between the two, because if it's too simplistic, then it sounds amateurish, and it's just not, it doesn't sound polished and professional and satisfying. It doesn't sound legit. And so that's what I think in this song the producers have done very well, the arrangers. And this is definitely a good example of what I talked about earlier, of arranging things, just just the very basic parts. So making the decision of only having synth and vocals for the first part of the song, and then not bringing the full drums in, right? So these are all decisions that you can make at a very early stage, and if you do that, that can also influence your songwriting, right? So here, as opposed to maybe the other song, there was a lot more focus on the melody and the lyrics as well, right? So that is another sort of takeaway. And then, of course, later on, after the first bit of the hook or chorus, then the synth pad came in, and things were a lot fuller. Right, let's listen to another track, and we've got Miley, and let's see what she's got for us. Here we have a long intro, right, with a riff.
Yeah, it's been a long night and the mirror's telling me to go home. But it's been a long time since I felt this good on my own. Lot of years went by with my hands tied up in your ropes. Forever and ever, no more. The midnight sky is the road I'm taking. Head high up in the clouds. I was born to run, I don't belong to anyone. Oh no, don't need to be loved by you. Fire in my lungs, can't fight the devil on my tongue.
So this hook has got two halves, second half coming up.
See my lips on a mouth, everybody's talking now, baby. Oh, you know it's true, yeah, that I was born to run, I don't belong to anyone. Oh no, don't need to be loved by you.
All right. So this was a very important songwriting technique. So in terms of structuring, arranging your song, which is to make the second half of your hook even hookier, if that's a word, than the first half, right? So you're piling it on from the verse to the pre-chorus to the first half of the hook to the second half of the hook, right? Just increasing the excitement, the engagement all the way through. And another trick that this song used was to take out the drums before the chorus came in, because the more silence, the more quiet you have, it's like the quiet before the storm, the calm before the storm, right? Then that storm will blow a lot more violently than if there's been a strong breeze all day and then the gusts just the gusts are a little bit stronger, right? So here we have the drums taken out, and then the drums come back in, and then the chorus has a lot more excitement and movement. So other than that, so as I said, during the song, the intro was a little bit longer and contained a recognizable riff, and other than that, there wasn't anything super remarkable in this arrangement. But I think all three songs were quite different, even though they belong to a similar kind of genre. So that means that we have a lot of freedom to do what we want, but there are still boundaries of good taste, and that's something we need to develop over many years and decades. And the fastest thing to develop those taste buds is to just listen to a lot of good music. So, and especially targeted or active listening, which is the first thing that I propose in my songwriting course, Song Wando. There are obviously a lot of lessons in there, a lot of modules and everything else, but it starts right with what we're doing here, which is active listening, not just listening to whatever we like, which we could also call guilty pleasures, right? So for me, that would be maybe my favorite bands from the 80s, like The Police or U2, but I hardly ever listen to them now. because I'm not making music like that, right? So when I listen to music, it's mainly for making playlists like the one I'm showing you today, which are in line with whatever song I'm working on right now. Of course, I may be working on 2 or 3 songs, but whatever musical genres I'm working in, so that I can be sure that I know what the best people in this genre, people who do this kind of stuff all the time, are doing, and how my music and my song and my production and my arrangement relate to that. So next, what have we got? Kylie. All right. So yes, so there's a reason why this song is in the playlist. Maybe you can guess. Let's say it's a little bit different from the previous 3 songs, and see if you can find out why this song is in the playlist, what it's in there for. Certainly not because it's my favorite song of the year. Right, let's have a listen. Second half is pretty similar. So what do you think it was? So to me, the main difference, other than this being a 4 on the floor song, which the others weren't because the kick drum was playing a different pattern, a sparser pattern or a funkier pattern, but not like the solid 4 on the floor, which is like 1, 2, 3, 4, like that, which is the most disco songs have. But because the production I'm working on has quite a complex kick pattern and not a 4 on the floor, that's why I largely picked songs with similar patterns. Because otherwise, when you're referencing something, so you're trying to find out how your low end, your bottom end is shaping up against the references. If your references have a 4 on the floor, that bottom end is going to be a lot more solid, a lot thicker than when you have kicks missing from time to time. But I put on this song into the playlist because it's quite bright, right? So when and up and fun sounding. So when I do my own production, I want to make sure that my song is never brighter than this, right? And later on, we're gonna listen to something that is on the dark side, and so these 2 songs are going to be my end stops, right? So it's to make sure that I don't veer beyond those stops. It's a little bit for those of you who are into video editing or television or something like that. It's something called broadcast safe, and this is about. It's like a rhomboid, I think it's called. Where you can see it on a visual scope. So if your brightness is outside those boundaries, then it's going to be turned down by some filters on the broadcasting transmitters, something like that. I'm not an expert in it, but I've done some editing with those scopes, and it's a good visual aid to make sure that you're not blinding the viewer with very, very bright whites. And so this is what I'm trying to create as well when I'm arranging songs or producing songs in relation to the references, is make sure that it's not too bright and not too dark. And so this was a very bright song, very up. Again, the arrangement is nothing special about it. It was just traditional disco-y type instruments, but much, much brighter sounding than a 70s track would have sounded. So maybe we should play that dark song right now, although it's a little bit out of sequence. And this is a song called Treasure by Bruno Mars. So take it away, Bruno.
Baby squirrel, use a sexy motherfucker.
Give me your attention, baby. I gotta tell you a little something about yourself. You're wonderful, flawless, ooh, you a sexy lady.
There's no top end to speak of. There's no loud hi-hats, ride cymbals, tambourines.
You don't know it, but you're fine, so fine. Fine, so fine. Ooh, oh, girl, I'm gonna show you when you're mine, oh mine. Mine, oh mine. Treasure, that is what you are.
Now we have the hi-hat coming in on the right-hand side if you listen to this in stereo.
You know you can make my wish come true.
But it's still not very bright overall. Right, so if it was going for a much more retro vibe like Bruno Mars seems to do these days, I don't know if you've heard the Silk Sonic track yet, then this would be a very good yardstick to go by. Because Bruno and his team have obviously done meticulous research, and of course they live and breathe that music anyway, right? So this is another thing to consider, is when you are a pop producer, you have to obviously deal in a lot of different subgenres, and it's always a good idea to play to your strengths, to work on genres or subgenres that you already love, because otherwise you're going to be up against it. And so Bruno Mars loves this type of music, and it shows in the quality of the productions and the songwriting as well, because of course he also looks at how lyrics were written back in the day, and melodies and chords, and to make it into an authentic, nostalgic experience for the listener, right? So that you have a lot of freedom. Of course, you could use just very traditional songwriting and then very modern production, or the other way around, or you could go the whole way and make everything sound retro. Up to you, but it's good to have an awareness of these things, right? Because if you're not aware, then, as I said earlier, you're just fumbling around in the dark in your own bubble, and whether something that you can be proud of and that's going to be accepted by a large number of people or loved by a large number of people is then in the lap of the gods. Whereas when you have a more systematic approach, which is what I'm teaching with my course Song Wando, to not leave it to chance, just basically go through a training program and get up to speed with everything that you need to know, then you're going to be in much better shape to turn the odds into your favor. Right? I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's going to be easier, which I suppose is all we can ask for, because I can assure you that imagine that music was a wild horse. You could never tame it, ever, right? And I'm sure even people like Paul McCartney are still struggling with it on a daily basis, right? It's just too complex. But we can just make sure that we don't make all those beginners' mistakes that Paul McCartney and John Lennon would have made in the early days, of course, right? But it took them many years to get to the top. And so in many ways, today's songwriting and production are a lot more complicated than they used to be in the early 60s, because you can do so much more and there's so many more genres. So it really pays to be up to speed with things, take shortcuts, and take systematic approaches to improving your knowledge on things. Right, this is my little discussion over of why it's a good idea to study. I study all the time. Obviously I teach as well. They say you teach what you have to learn, so I love teaching, but I also study a lot. and it helps me with coming up with better songs and productions. Let's listen to another arrangement. What have we got? Okay, let's see. This is called The Weekend. It's not the artist The Weekend. The song is called The Weekend, and it's by SZA, I think her name is pronounced, and Calvin Harris, and maybe a few others as well. Let's have a listen.
You say you got a girl. How you want me? How you want me when you got a girl? The feeling is reckless of knowing it's selfish. Knowing I'm desperate, getting on in and left, falling all over love. I do it till it's last. Hanging out the back, all of me, you laugh. Like, is you coming home? Is you out with her? I don't care long as you here, but
Just gonna stop it here. Just wanted to explain to you something to you before we move on. This is a good example of the feel and the groove being quite traditional, but the drums sounding very polished. That they are not old 70s loops, right? They are basically have all the hallmarks of modern drum production. Let's just continue.
30, no later than drop them drugs, give me what I want. My man is your man, hurt is her man too. My man is your man, hurt that's her man. Tuesday and Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, I just keep him satisfied through the weekend. You like 9 to 5, I'm the weekend. Make it lose his mind every weekend. You take Wednesday, Thursday, then just send him my way. Think I got.
Okay, so from what I can see, this is a remix. I must admit I don't know the original, but basically this is what we're faced with here. And what I would say, I really like how this sounds. It's probably for the tracks we've heard so far the best sounding track. But the song is a little bit so-so, right? It's got a theme to it, right? The days of the week and the weekend and all of that. So it's got a theme, a concept, which is great for those of you who have watched earlier shows, or maybe you've done some training with me. You know how much I go on about concepts and having something to say. But it's still, in terms of the melody and the way the arrangement is shaped, there's not a lot of build and there's not a lot of a payoff, right? You say it's a subtle payoff, it makes it cooler, but when you don't have a payoff, it's also harder to have a hit with a song, right? It's harder for people to remember what the song was like. So I'm finding this particular track, although it sounds very good and it's going to be a useful reference for my production, I'm finding it quite unremarkable, and I don't think I would be able to remember much of it, say in a couple of hours, right? Whereas the other songs I could probably sing back after hearing them once. So let's move on. Okay, now this is probably the biggest hit of them all from the ones we've listened to so far, and K-pop. Here we come.
'Cause I'm in the stars tonight. So watch me bring the fire, set the night light. Shoes on, get up in the morning, cup of milk, let's rock and roll.
No drums, right?
Kink out, kick the drum, rolling on like a rolling stone. Sing song when I'm walking home, jump up to the top of the
Just a very
brown.
quiet.
They don't call me on my phone, nice tea and I'll get my ping pong. This is dead heavy, can't hear the bass, boom, I'm ready. Life is sweet as honey, yeah, this beach chain like money. This go all alone, I'm into that, I'm good to go. I'm diamond, you know I glow. Hey, so let's go. 'Cause I'm in the stars tonight. So watch me bring the fire, set the night light. Hey, shining through the city with a little funky soul. So I'ma light it up like dynamite. Whoa.
Okay, so another quite traditional arrangement here. What was interesting is that it started out with half a hook, with just the vocal hook, straight away. And then the drum arrangement was very sparse to start with, and you could also hear that it had a traditional sort of funky disco bass line, but again very modern drums, and also a very produced, highly produced piano sound. So it wasn't like a piano you would find in a concert hall, right? So it all works together to give you a certain feel, a very sort of polished, very satisfying feel. And of course, this was mixed by Serban Ganea, who's probably the best mixer in the world. And to put all of this together, and the way it's been edited as well, you could hear the vocals were edited to the nth degree. This is the sound of perfection, if you like. And it's very different from, say, the Bruno Mars song we have heard earlier, which is also perfect, but it had more of this retro, slightly raw energy to it, whereas this doesn't, right? This is a perfect, polished pop. So there's no better or worse. Of course, it depends on your taste, but it also depends on what the artist wants, what the record company wants, what the fans like, what the fans expect as well. So if you're a BTS and suddenly your tracks sound like, I don't know, Beck or Hosier or Billie Eilish or somebody with a more left of center sound, then that's probably going to be a real problem. Maybe they could get away with it, but by and large their fans would expect a highly polished sound. And so when you start, if you are doing, say, K-pop or very polished pop music, it's a good idea to start with these kind of sound choices and arrangement choices early on, even in the writing process. Now, if you stripped this song back, you could play it on a guitar and it would still work, of course, because the songwriter is working on these kind of songs and getting the first single of a BTS album, then they are no mugs, right? So the song would still work. But I think it's a good idea to start with good sounds early on. And that's why it's good to study things like sound design, even if it's just how to choose the right loops and sounds rather than programming it from scratch. But to be aware of all of these different facets of songwriting and production is important, like I said. And so here, when you're doing pop, it's really good to have the latest and best drum sounds, the latest and best pad sounds, the right bass sounds when you come to arranging your stuff. For other genres, this may be different, right? So depends on what you're working on. Right, what else have we got? We got more Bruno. Well, let's listen to some more Bruno. We've got a song here called 24K Magic. Again, to give you the contrast between what we just listened to, the perfect polished pop, and this, which has got a different type of perfection.
Tonight, I just wanna take you out.
Just listen to the chords straight away, right? There's a huge difference. Very traditional R&B.
Players, put your pinky rings up to the moon. Girls, what y'all trying to do?
Really morphing from no groove to very, very strong groove.
Head to toe, so player. Look out. Pop, it's showtime. Showtime. Guess who's back again? Oh, they don't know. Oh, they don't know. I bet they know as soon as we walk in. Showed up. I'm wearing Cuban links. Yeah. Designer mix. Yeah. Inglewood's finest shoes. Don't look too hard, might hurt yourself. Known to give the color red.
Okay, so you can hear that there was very strong 80s, 90s flavor to this, right? So the correct drum machines, of course, very well mixed, but it still has a retro flavor. It's just not a 70s retro flavor, right? But again, it's just everything is very present and correct, and it sounds beautifully recorded, beautifully mixed, and all of that. But if I just quickly go back to the Kylie song.
I can
So again, we're talking about, because this is an actual playlist that I'm using for a production, we're talking about different facets, different end stops, different boundaries that we can use. And so how retro something sounds, how bright, how dark something sounds, these are all elements that we can use. How wide something sounds. If you listen to the claps here, they're extremely wide, right? They only really happen in the sides. If you were to mono this, then you can try this at home, then the claps almost disappear. Right? This was a choice made in the mixing or production stage, or both, and it gives it a certain sound that certainly wouldn't have been around or wouldn't have been used rather in the 70s. Right? So just trying to point you towards different ways of listening to music, doing what I called active listening earlier, rather than letting it just wash over you. There's so many things you can listen out for, and to me this makes music listening more enjoyable. Right? So you lose a little bit of that innocence that you may have had when you first started out as a music fan, but you gain many more levels of satisfaction that you can get from music listening. And of course the good thing is, as musicians, as writers, producers, we can then immediately return to our song in progress and be inspired by it. Right? So the way I like to see it is to ratchet up the pressure by going on input, listening to music, maybe reading about how famous records were made, or interviews with your favorite producers and writers, and then going on input so much that something has to come out, right? That you have to go into output mode, and that's where you are much more likely to write your best stuff, rather than scheduling a writing session, say for 10 o'clock till 3 o'clock, and having to finish something just from a blank page with no inspiration, no vibe, no nothing. Right? Now, when you may think that you can take this too far, which is true, I have worked with producers who shall remain nameless, who have taken it too far and gone into a playlist like this and taken, say, the hi-hat from this track, the snare from that track, the kick from that track, the Rhodes from that track, the melody from this track, put it all together, and it did sound like it belonged into that playlist, which was great, but it didn't sound original enough, quite apart from any kind of legal issues that you may have if you steal things wholesale, right? And of course there's a certain pride in coming up with your own music, but if you don't do enough of it, then you run the risk of your song sounding bad original. So I divide songs into good original and bad original, and bad original means you don't eat, right? It means you have no fan base, means you have nobody to support you in your musical journey. And so the good original is when the song feels like it belongs, feels like it's legit, but it doesn't blatantly rip off other songs. Because don't forget, we heard the famous court cases in the last few years, like the Robin Thicke one with Marvin Gaye, I think it was, and Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams lost that case, although that didn't even steal any parts of a song, just the vibe of a song, right? Of a drum groove, right? So you got to be careful with the game of active listening to not take it too far, right? But there's risks on both sides, right? So as I just pointed out, right? Let's see what else we can do. What we've got on our list here. Okay, more Bruno. Okay, Zara Larson. Let's see what she's got. Very different straight away.
I've been living days like they'll never be over, as long as the sky is blue. But if I saw you sat on the street, I'd pull
So when I spoke over the intro, you could hear there were some piano chords, lots of reverb on the piano chords, and it just sounded more mysterious. It didn't sound like a straight up party song. And this was confirmed when the song went on. So the chords are quite dark, the melody is quite dark, the subject matter of the lyric a bit heavier. Maybe it's not like let's go out on a Friday night and dance away until Monday morning, something like that, which many songs in that genre are about. It's nothing like that. So the reason why this song is in my playlist is because the drums and bass just sound very, very good. Right? I like the ratio between dark sounds and bright sounds is really well mixed to me. The song that I'm working on doesn't have these kind of pads that you just heard when the chorus stopped. So I'm going to use the bit just before for referencing. Right? Then it's going to be much, much closer to what I'm shooting for with this particular production. And in terms of what we said at the beginning, where you strip away the sounds and the sound of the track and just are left with the straight up song, I don't think this is a brilliant song. It's not a bad song, but it's a sort of middling song. It doesn't really have any sort of highs and lows, not like some of the other big hits we listen to, right? And so this was a choice. I mean, Zara Larsson has had some big hits, right? But I think she sang on a song called, was it Symphony? I think that was her, which went up and down, right? Like a symphony would do, was by Clean Bandit, who are classically trained. So just a big difference between that song and this song here. And so this song, I don't know whether it was a big hit, but it wasn't a massive hit, right? And there are reasons for that. Sometimes there are political reasons, but a lot of the time it's really down to the writing stage. So here, I would say the sounds are almost too good, and then when you have something that is so good in the sonic department, sometimes it can be easy to forget that still the most important thing is the underlying song, the melody, the chords, and how it's arranged, and the lyrics, of course. So let's listen to, well, what have we got? Okay, we've got a song called Dance Alone by Taylor Parks, and let's listen. Super sparse, right?
Left hand to right hand on the Bible. You walked in, I was dead on arrival. My heart and head playing tricks, being rival. Yeah. Trying to move on, but I'm stuck in a cycle. Yeah. Cause I don't want nobody unless that somebody is you. If I had anybody, I would want somebody like you. And I know that we shouldn't, but I know there's worse we could do. I don't wanna dance alone. I don't wanna dance alone.
Can you hear how this song has got a much more obvious hook?
Until the lights come on. So meet me right here, meet me right here, meet me right here, meet me right here. Left foot right, two stepping on a high note. Hey, the room keeps spinning.
Right, and very, 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 very sparse in the verses, so you can really feature on the bass and on the vocal, which in itself is quite rangy, quite melodic, but it's certainly not sort of on one level like the previous song was, and so yeah, so this is a much better song. The arrangement is different, right? I like the sound of the record before as well. I liked it a lot. Here it's a much more sort of traditional R&B, and It just goes to show within a genre there are a lot of options that you have, and it really depends on your taste, on your musical background, what the artist wants, what your co-writers like, many possible permutations. And this is what makes it exciting, but this is also what makes it challenging, because the more options you have, the more difficult it becomes. So that's why, again, sometimes I repeat things, but hopefully I only repeat things that are really important. And again, I said begin with the end in mind, right? So while you're going through all of these options, it's always good to see what you want to do. Refer back to a playlist, or at least your memory of the genre, and just make sure that you don't stray too far. Right? Don't go off on too many tangents, right? Because otherwise your song is going to end up in some kind of musical no man's land, and so it'll sound like nothing else, but it also sounds like nothing that people want to buy, right? So, or people want to sign, if that's your aim, and therefore it's always good to listen to people, and of course to collaborate as well, which is something that is often overlooked, because with the modern DAWs, it's so easy, or relatively easy, to come up with a complete arrangement by yourself, and maybe mix it and master it as well, and write the whole song and maybe sing it, depending on what kind of skills you have. But it's always a good idea to collaborate, because then somebody can come in and say, look, what does this sound like? This bass sound, it doesn't go with that kind of bass line. It's a great bass sound, but say, for example, for this type of music, the last song we heard, if you used a grimy bass sound, so grime is basically a South London sound, which is it's a very digital, sort of FM based bass sound, and so if you put that over the top or into this arrangement, it would sound different, but it wouldn't be as good, right? It would be an experiment, which is great. It's great to experiment, but if you had 2 or 3 people in the room, it would probably not make the cut at the end of the day, and people would revert to the kind of song that actually is in this arrangement, which is much more traditional, right? Okay, so maybe we should have listen to one more song before we go. What shall we have? More Dua Lipa. We have okay, we have one more by a singer called Kim Petras, and again, listen out for something. Listen out for the reason why this song may be on the playlist. We talked about end stops before, so what does this song have or not have in relation to the other songs? Right, song is called Malibu.
Tell me, how do I get over you when your eyes are so Pacific view? Yeah, falling deep into Curacao blue, and all your kisses taste like, and all your kisses taste like Malibu, and all your kisses taste like.
Which artist does this remind you of? 100 points for guessing.
Tell me, what am I supposed to do?
Right, so the answer is Michael Jackson. But very good. So you have a girl singer here doing a Michael Jackson kind of tribute. But I like this song. But I'm just going to play you another song right now. And it depends if you're listening to it on your phone or very cheap earbuds, you're not going to be able to hear what I'm getting at.
So lonely in your bed, does breaking me make you feel good? Guess you don't understand what goes.
Right, so that's enough. So basically, the last song had a lot of bottom end, right, with an 808 and a really low frequencies included in that song. Whereas Malibu, the Michael Jackson tribute, didn't have any low end really. There was nothing below 50 hertz, And so it's a different choice, right? So when you don't have a heavy bass end, then your track is going to sound lighter. It's going to sound more fun, maybe, right? So all sorts of things that you can do. For my particular production that I want to do, I don't want my bottom end to be as light as the Kim Petras song, so that's why it's going to be on the list, just to make sure I have a little bit more than her. I think they've taken out too much. But these are the sort of things you can listen to when you listen to references, when you listen to your favorite music, both in terms of the songwriting. How are the hooks being arranged? How's the whole song being arranged? How does it start? What is being held back? How busy is it? How sparse is it? And of course, how does it relate to what I want to do, what I like, what my collaborators like? And when you do that, my recommendation is to do this for hours, right? Not just for half an hour and then you start mixing. No, do this for many, many hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours, because then you are right in the middle of that genre. You one of the producers in that genre. You feel like yes, this one of the gang, right? And that makes everything much easier. Because what we want to have all this knowledge available on an intuitive level, right? When we mix, when we write, when we arrange, we don't want to be thinking about lots of rules, right? We want to be able to just do it. And so the more hours you spend on it, the easier it becomes to have, and the easier access you have to this kind of knowledge, and then you can deploy that knowledge in your own songs, which is what it's all about. So this brings us to the end of today's session, which I genuinely hope you've enjoyed as much as I have. We had some great party songs here, and hopefully we've discovered some useful nuggets of wisdom along the way. As always, there are links below if you want to have a look at more of the courses that the Garnish School offers. If you want to study songwriting, of course, my songwriting course, Songwando, is the place to go, where we go into this and everything else in much, much more detail. But it's going to be, the course is hopefully as fun and as informal and relaxed as today's session was. But it's just going to be more of it, and it's going to be a bit more structured, right? But for today, this definitely is it. And I shall see you next time. Thank you.